As a full-time game developer who's been doing this full-time for about 6 years, but I've really been making games for about half my life. I'm 31, about 15 years just making games. I can say confidently right now that you don't have to be the world's greatest coder. In fact, you don't even have to be good. You could be just adequate. And I say this because I'm a pretty bad coder. I live stream my games all the time on my channel, and you guys will tell me in the chat how bad my code looks. But I have games on every platform. I make money selling games. I bring in enough income to support my family just from my games. So how is it that I write really bad code, but I'm able to actually make games? And I actually got a question about this on my YouTube channel. The question, I asked if you guys had any questions here, and the top voted question from, I'm so sorry, Herr Dunkelheit. I'm sorry, I know I mispronounced that. The question is, hi Thomas, I'm afraid of programming and of hire. I'm learning how to code for the last 6 months, and although I feel confident enough to make basic things, I know I'll need some help at some point with more complicated mechanics. My problem is I've decided to hire a programmer on Fiverr, but I feel bad about it. I feel like I have to. I must code the game myself, or I'm not going to learn anything. And if I can't do something as important as that, I'll never be a successful indie game dev. I know I sound like a drama queen, but that's what I feel. So, what do you think about hiring a programmer to do code for me? Is it okay? I would like to focus on other tasks that I really enjoy. Dude, that's totally fine. You don't need to worry about that at all. I will say this, first and foremost, I think it's really important that if you're going to be a full-time game developer, if you're going to do this full-time, and you're going to be in the independent sphere, the independent arena, aka not work for AAA, not work for a studio and have one niche job, but rather do a lot of jobs, you probably should have an understanding of C#. So if you're using Unity, you should probably have an understanding of C#. Or Unreal, I believe you can learn Blueprint, which is kind of like a UI or a GUI system for C# or their coding system. I don't really know Unreal. Point being, I feel like you should really have a good understanding, just a decent understanding, like a C+. If that was your grade and you took a test, a C+ in your C# skills. That's because that's just coming from somebody who's doing that right now. My skill set is probably a C+. I'm not the best coder, but I understand the basics of code. And I actually am working on my own system for one of my games. It's about a little doggy. The little doggy game that I'm working on is a code base that I worked on completely from scratch. There's one little element about rolling a ball around that I took from Unity's tutorials, but everything else is coded from scratch. My other game, Father, I hired somebody like you did. I hired somebody, AJ, his link is in the description. I hired him to create the core code base. So let me sort of talk about both methods, okay? This method over here, the one where I hired AJ, it's great because you get a core system ready to go, but the problem with that approach, if you are not as smart as the developer and you have sort of a rudimentary understanding of code, like me, opening up that code to make my own changes once the contracted hire is expired, and that's no knock on AJ, that's just what happened. I hired him for one thing, and now I can open up the code and make some edits myself. But once that happens, once you need to dig into the code, it can get a little weird. It can get time consuming. It can feel confusing, and you can feel lost. And you can kind of feel chained to your inadequacy because you're looking at code that you don't understand. Whereas if you have a general understanding of code and you create a game from scratch with your code, then it's actually a lot easier to dig into the code and make changes. So in terms of preference, for a bigger game, you kind of have to hire out people for help. It's just the way it goes. But for smaller games, I feel so much more free and so much more comfortable. Again, this isn't a thing about AJ. This isn't AJ's problem. This is my problem because I don't have adequate understanding of more complex code, whereas AJ does. So my systems are super simplistic in my games. And so those systems I can iterate on and scale because all I'm doing is basically a bunch of conditional if-then statements, a few arrays, audio sources, audio clips, game object references, and that's about all I'm doing, right? So all in all, you don't need to feel bad. Like, this is the thing, is sort of my third point here, is stop identifying with your game in that way. Your game is not some entity that determines whether you're good or bad at something. It's not really related to you. I know this is more of a philosophical discussion, but you shouldn't put your identity in a project you're working on. That's kind of silly. It's just a silly project, so you shouldn't be identifying with it like that. So you don't need to feel bad about it, and you don't need to think, like you said here, I must code the game myself. Well, instead of thinking about what it means to you, think about what's the goal. What is the end result here? For me, the end result, the end goal of whatever I do, whether I hire people or whether I write my own code, is to make a great game and get it done fast. That's actually really my biggest goal. Get it done fast. If that's your goal, then who cares how you get there? One thing I've learned, especially once I've been live streaming game development for like 4 years now. What I've learned is there are so many wrong ways to do something and so many right ways to do something that at some point it's all relative. Like, at some point it really doesn't matter. It maybe mattered a decade ago or maybe even 20 years ago, doing really nice code, but when you're making an indie game, don't worry so much about the code being from scratch or having the best code and the best understanding of code. So, all in all, I recommend you learn to code. I recommend you get a C grade when learning C#. Okay. That means you don't have to be advanced, just kind of mediocre. I think that's totally fine. Once you have that knowledge, then you can hire out coders and you can make code yourself. If you're making a small game, make code yourself. I would recommend just doing it yourself. If you're making a bigger game, you might need to hire somebody out because there's a lot of work to do. Anyway, if you really enjoyed this, guys, and you want to save time and maybe you don't want to code a game from scratch, feel free to check out my 2D game kit below, and also check out my 3D course below, totally free course on how you can get started making a 3D game in Unity with no knowledge of modeling. All right, guys, I'll talk to you later. Cheers. Get over here. Get down. Hey, thanks for watching. By the way, if you haven't downloaded that free 2D game kit below, click below. It's my treat to you. I used this game kit to make a game for PewDiePie in 14 days, and I actually got to play it with him in front of his audience, which was really cool. This game kit is totally free. It's my treat to you, and you can use it however you want. You can make a commercial game and make $1 million off this game kit. I don't care. Or you could just use it for a hobby project. It's my treat to you. And by the way, if you haven't clicked like, that would mean a ton to me. Hit subscribe. And also, this is important, hit that notification bell. Here's why. If you get notified of when I'm live, you can watch me make my next game and let me know in the chat what you think about the game or any ideas you have, and you might just show up. Your chat might just show up in the next video that I upload. All right. I'll talk to you later. Bye. I love you too.